I never planned to attend the Mitchell family barbecue. Why would I? I barely knew Sarah, my college roommate from 10 years ago, and I definitely didn't know her extended family. But Sarah was persistent. Please, Olivia. I can't face them alone. This time, she begged over our lunch catch-up, her eyes doing that pleading thing that hadn't changed since our dorm days. Mom's been telling everyone I'm bringing a successful friend from the city to prove I actually know people with real careers. I sighed, pushing around the remains of my salad. So I'm just career validation? You're the regional director at Apex Tech. That's exactly the kind of success story Mom wants to parade around to Aunt Judith. Sarah leaned forward. 3 hours max. Free food, decent wine, and I'll owe you forever. That's how I found myself, on a perfectly good Saturday, driving to a suburban McMansion where I knew exactly one person. The Mitchell family estate, which Sarah's mother apparently referred to as Mitchelton, was exactly what you'd expect from people desperate to impress. Ostentatious fountains, manicured hedges, and a circular driveway crowded with luxury cars sporting personalized plates. Sarah greeted me with the relieved expression of a drowning person spotting a lifeboat. You came! She hugged me tight, whispering, Thank you. Remember, 3 hours, then we make an excuse about a work emergency. Got it. I smoothed my sensible navy dress, suddenly feeling underdressed despite having deliberately chosen something professional. Around us, women in designer sundresses and men in pastel. Polos mingled with practiced laughs and strategic conversations. Let me introduce you to Mom, Sarah said, guiding me through clusters of people toward a woman who was clearly the matriarch. Same heart-shaped face as Sarah, but with sharper eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. Mother, this is Olivia. Chen, my friend I told you about. Olivia's the regional director at Apex Tech. Mrs. Mitchell's assessment was immediate and transparent. Apex? The software company? How interesting. And at your age. Though I suppose these tech companies do love their diversity hires. I maintained my professional smile, the one I'd perfected through countless meetings with condescending clients. We value talent in all its forms. Of course, dear. She patted my arm. Do help yourself to the canapes. The caterer is frightfully expensive. As she floated away to greet other guests, Sarah grimaced. Sorry about that, she's exactly as advertised, I finished. Don't worry about it. For the next hour, I played my role perfectly, the successful friend, discussing market trends and digital transformation with mild interest while dodging personal questions. I was on my second glass of actually decent rosé when I met him. You must be Sarah's college friend, said a voice behind me. I turned to find a man about my age, though his button-down shirt and boat shoes aged him conservatively. Handsome. In that predictable way, strong jaw, confident posture, the kind of smile that suggested he was used to people agreeing with him. Olivia, I offered, extending my hand. Blake Mitchell, he replied, his handshake firm and practiced. Sarah's cousin. I don't think we've crossed paths before. I doubt we run in the same circles, I said politely. Probably not. His eyes flicked to my dress, my sensible heels, making the same assessment his aunt had earlier. Sarah mentioned, You work in tech? Something management level? Regional director at Apex Tech. His eyebrows rose slightly. Impressive title. What does that actually entail? I bit back my initial response. I'd lost count of how many times men had asked me to justify my position. I oversee operations and strategic initiatives for the Northeast. Market. Sounds ambiguous. His smile didn't waver. But that's tech for you. Big titles, vague responsibilities. My father always says tech is where people go when they can't handle the rigor of traditional industries. I took a slow sip of my wine. And what do you do, Blake? I'm Senior Vice President of Business Development at Meridian Financial. He straightened almost imperceptibly. Been there 8 years. We're the oldest independent financial services firm in the tri-state area. How nice for you. Something in my tone must have pricked his ego because his smile tightened. It's demanding work. Not everyone has what it takes. Financial services separates the winners from the failures pretty quickly. Before I could respond, we were interrupted by an older man who clapped Blake on the shoulder. There you are, son! Come meet Jeff's boy, Harvard Law, just like you. Blake nodded at me with that particular smile men give women they've decided aren't worth their time. Duty calls. Enjoy the party. I watched him walk away, already dismissing me from his thoughts. If I'd been smarter, I would have done the same. Written him off as just another entitled finance bro and gone looking for more wine. But fate had other plans. Plans that began unfolding Monday morning when I arrived at Apex headquarters for what I thought was a routine executive briefing. Olivia! My CEO greeted me with unusual enthusiasm. Just the person I wanted to see. How was your weekend? Uneventful, I lied, following her into the conference room. Good. Listen, I know this is sudden, but I want you in the Meridian Financial meeting. They're finally ready to move forward with the digital transformation project, and I want your eyes on it. I froze. Meridian Financial? The independent firm in Connecticut? That's the one. Huge potential contract. They're finally modernizing after decades of resistance. Their SVP of Business Development is leading the project. She shuffled through her tablet. Blake Mitchell. Apparently, he's been pushing for this against significant internal opposition. Old money firm, old school thinking. You know the type. I certainly did. Anyway, they're coming in at 11. I want you to take point on this. If we land Meridian, every other dinosaur financial firm in New England will follow. As she walked away, I stood there processing the cosmic joke the universe had just played on me. Blake Mitchell, the man who had dismissed me and my career not 24 hours ago, was about to walk into a meeting where I would evaluate whether his precious traditional firm deserved Apex's innovation. I straightened my shoulders and checked my reflection in the glass wall. My ambiguous title was about to become very, very clear. The Meridian Financial team arrived precisely at 11, with the kind of coordinated punctuality that suggested military precision rather than genuine enthusiasm. I watched from my office as they were escorted to the main conference room. 5 men in nearly identical navy suits, Blake Mitchell at the center, his posture radiating the same confidence I'd witnessed at the barbecue. I deliberately waited 10 minutes before making my entrance. A petty move, perhaps, but I'd learned early, in my career, that small power dynamics matter. Gentlemen, sorry to keep you waiting, I said, striding into the room where our CEO, Diane, was already making introductions. Olivia Chen, Regional Director. 5 heads turned toward me. 4 faces showed polite interest. Blake's face, that was something else entirely. The split-second journey from confusion to recognition to horror was so swift I almost missed it. But the slight pallor that followed was unmistakable. Ms. Chen will be overseeing the Meridian Transformation Project, Diane continued, oblivious to the sudden tension. She's led our most successful enterprise integrations over the past 3 years. Pleasure to meet you all, I said, my eyes lingering on Blake just long enough to acknowledge our previous encounter without drawing attention to it. I believe Mr. Mitchell and I actually met recently, though under different circumstances. Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. Yes, through family connections. Small world, isn't it just? I smiled pleasantly, taking the seat directly across from him. Now, I understand Meridian is finally ready to enter the 21st century with its systems. What prompted this evolution in thinking? The oldest member of their team, introduced as Walter Rains, CFO, cleared his throat. Client demands, primarily. Our high-net-worth customers expect certain digital conveniences that our legacy systems can't provide. And competition, added another Meridian executive. The younger firms are eating into our traditional client base with their flashy apps and instant service. Blake has been championing this initiative internally, Walter said, nodding toward him. It wasn't an easy sell to our board. All eyes turned to Blake, who had apparently recovered enough to slip back into professional mode. Meridian's strength has always been our personal relationships and financial expertise, he said, voice steady. But we recognize that without technological modernization, those strengths become irrelevant. Hence this partnership. The way he hesitated before partnership told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't his idea. He'd been forced into this position, probably by market pressures and executive mandate. Well, we're certainly excited about the possibility of working with such a traditional institution, I replied. Though I should be clear, what we offer isn't just a technological upgrade. It's a complete transformation in how you serve clients, process data, and make decisions. Some find that level of change challenging. Blake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Meridian isn't afraid of challenges, Ms. Chen. Excellent. Then let's discuss what those challenges actually entail. For the next 2 hours, I led a detailed technical discussion of Apex's enterprise transformation methodology. I directed the most complex questions to Blake, watching him struggle with concepts that were clearly outside his expertise. Each time he fumbled, I would step in with a helpful clarification. My assistance just pointed enough to emphasize the knowledge gap between us. By the time we broke for lunch, the power dynamics had shifted completely. The other Meridian executives were addressing their questions to me rather than Blake, and he knew it. We'll need some time to discuss internally, Walter said as they prepared to leave. But I'm impressed with your approach, Ms. Chen. Blake, set up the follow-up for next week, will you? I watched Blake's face as he was relegated to administrative duties. Of course, he replied tightly. I'll coordinate with Ms. Chen's team. As the others filed out, Blake lingered behind, waiting until we were alone in the conference room. That was unnecessary, he said quietly, his professional veneer cracking. Which part? I gathered my materials calmly. The thorough explanation of our methodology or making you look like you actually know what you're talking about when it comes to cloud infrastructure. You know what I mean. The barbecue. You could have mentioned who you were. I looked up at him, genuinely surprised. Why would I? You'd already decided what I was worth based on a 30-second conversation. Besides, you were too busy categorizing people as winners and failures to ask any meaningful questions. A flush crept up his neck. That was a social setting. This is business. Fascinating how some people think those are different ethical universes. I stood, meeting his gaze directly. For the record, Blake, I didn't orchestrate this situation, but I'm not going to apologize for it either. Meridian needs Apex a lot more than we need you. If that's uncomfortable, perhaps you should reconsider how you evaluate people upon first meeting them. I stepped around him toward the door, then paused. Oh, and we'll need your complete system architecture documentation before our next meeting. I assume that's something you can handle? The look on his face, confusion mixed with dawning panic, confirmed what I'd suspected. He had no idea what system architecture documentation even meant. I'll have our IT team prepare that, he managed. Perfect. Looking forward to it. As I walked back to my office, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. How's your Monday going? Still recovering from Mitchell family overload? I smiled to myself. Actually, it got interesting. Very interesting. Call you tonight. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and calls, but I couldn't stop thinking about the Meridian project. Not because of Blake, though his discomfort was admittedly satisfying, but because of the opportunity it represented. Transforming a century-old financial institution would be a career-defining project. I couldn't let personal satisfaction interfere with professional outcomes. By the time I left the office, I'd decided to take the high road. Tomorrow, I'd assign one of my team leaders to work directly with Blake, removing myself from the personal dynamics while maintaining oversight of the project. That resolution lasted exactly 12 hours, until my 7 a.m. coffee was interrupted by an email from Diane Olivia, received concerning call from Walter Rains last night. Blake Mitchell has apparently expressed doubts about our cultural fit with Meridian. Claims your approach is too aggressive for their traditional values. Walter wants you to personally address his concerns. Meeting rescheduled for today, 2 p.m. DI stared at my screen, coffee forgotten. So that's how it was going to be. Rather than acknowledging his own limitations, Blake was attacking my professional approach, with gendered code words like aggressive that were all too familiar to women in leadership. Fine. If Blake Mitchell wanted to make this personal, I could play that game, but unlike him, I'd make sure to win. I reached for my phone and dialed Sarah's number. Hey, it's me. Remember how you said you'd owe me forever for that barbecue? Time to collect. I need everything you know about your cousin Blake. Sarah was surprisingly eager to dish on her cousin. Blake? Oh God, where do I even start? She laughed into the phone. The golden boy who can do no wrong in Aunt Patricia's eyes. Harvard undergrad, Harvard Business School, which he mentions approximately every 7 minutes. I need specifics, I said, pacing my apartment as I prepared for the day. Professional background, weaknesses, pressure points? Okay, Detective Chen, Sarah replied, amusement in her voice. Let's see. He's been at Meridian since graduation. Because Uncle Richard is golf buddies with the CEO. Started in wealth management but kept getting promoted despite, according to family gossip, mediocre performance. I made mental notes as I slipped on my blazer. Does he have any actual technical knowledge? Tech? Blake? Sarah snorted. He still asks me to help him with his phone settings, but he's big on throwing around buzzwords he doesn't understand. What? About his relationship with the other executives? Well, he's terrified of Walter Rains, Sarah said. Walter's old-school finance, started as an accountant in the Stone Age, worked his way up. He despises entitlement, only tolerates Blake because of the family connection. Interesting. A plan was beginning to form. What else should I know? He got passed over for executive VP last year, went to someone outside the company. Blake was furious. Word is he's on thin ice with the board despite his connections. This tech project might be his last chance to prove himself. Perfect. Sarah, you're amazing. Wait, are you going to destroy my cousin? Because while I'm not opposed to it, holiday gatherings are already awkward enough. Not destroy, just educate. I glanced at the clock. I have to go. I'll call you later. Armed with this insider knowledge, I arrived at Apex an hour early to prepare. First, I pulled the complete proposal documentation, focusing on the ROI section that detailed how our transformation would specifically benefit Meridian's bottom line, the language that would speak to Walter Rains. Then, I researched Blake's public LinkedIn profile, noting the projects he claimed credit for, the promotions that seemed suspiciously rapid, and the glowing recommendations that all came from family connections. Finally, I spoke with Diane, giving her a carefully edited version of my history with Blake. We've met socially. There may be some professional jealousy at play, but I can handle it. I trust you, she said. Just make sure we keep Meridian. The contract value is significant. At 1:55, I stationed myself in the conference room, reviewing materials with practiced casualness. When the door opened, I was unsurprised to see Blake enter alone. The others will be here shortly, he said stiffly. Walter wanted me to speak with you first. Did he? Or was that your suggestion? I gestured to the chair across from me. Either way, I'm glad for the opportunity to clear the air. Blake remained standing. Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm not playing. Any game, Blake. I'm doing my job, evaluating whether Meridian is a suitable client for Apex's services. I folded my hands on the table. The question is whether you're doing yours. His eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means that calling me aggressive to Walter Raines was a tactical error, especially when your own understanding of this project seemed limited. I tilted my head. System architecture documentation, cloud infrastructure, basic concepts for anyone leading a digital transformation. Technology is your job, he countered. Strategy is mine. And how's that strategy working out? I understand you were passed over for EVP last year. This project is your chance to redeem yourself, isn't it? Your last chance, perhaps. The color drained from his face. Does it matter? What matters is that we both know what's at stake here. I stood, moving around the table until I was facing him directly. You need this project to succeed. For that to happen, you need me. But you let your ego get in the way because a woman you dismissed as a failure turned out to be more successful than you imagined. It's exactly what happened. Now you have a choice. I leaned against the table, arms crossed. You can continue this petty resistance, in which case I'll make sure Walter Raines understands exactly how little you bring to this project. Or we can establish a professional working relationship where I help you look good while actually delivering value to Meridian. The conference room door opened before Blake could respond. Walter Raines entered, followed by the other Meridian executives and Diane. Ms. Chen, Blake. Good, you're already discussing matters, Walter said, setting down his briefcase. Have we resolved our concerns? Blake looked at me, a complex mix of emotions crossing his face. For a moment, I thought he might double down on his accusations. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and adopted a professional tone. Yes, I believe we have. Ms. Chen has clarified Apex's approach, and I think it aligns well with Meridian's needs. Walter seemed surprised but pleased. Excellent. Then let's get down to specifics, shall we? The meeting proceeded smoothly after that. Blake didn't exactly defer to me, but he stopped challenging every point I made. When technical questions arose that he couldn't answer, he redirected them to me with reasonable professionalism. By the end of the 2-hour session, we had a preliminary agreement. Walter seemed particularly impressed with the ROI projections. I'd prepared. These numbers make sense? He said, reviewing the documents. Clear, concrete benefits without the typical tech industry fluff. Blake, you should have shown me this yesterday. Blake managed a tight smile. I wanted to review it thoroughly first. As the meeting concluded, Walter pulled me aside. Ms. Chen, I appreciate your directness. Too many consultants try to dazzle us with jargon rather than substance. That's not our approach at Apex, I assured him. We focus on tangible outcomes, not buzzwords. Refreshing. He glanced at Blake, who was speaking with Diane across the room. Between us, Blake has potential, but lacks technical depth. I'm counting on you to fill those gaps without embarrassing him publicly. Family politics, he added with a knowing look. His uncle is on our board. I understand completely, I said. We'll make sure this project succeeds for everyone involved. After the Meridian team departed, Diane gave me an approving nod. Crisis averted, it seems. Whatever you said to him worked. Just professional clarity, I replied. We understand each other now. Back in my office, I was gathering my things to leave when Blake appeared in the doorway, alone. May I come in? He asked, more subdued than I'd seen him before. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Of course. He sat, looking uncomfortable. I wanted to clarify a few things. I'm listening. First, I never actually called you a failure at the barbecue, he said. I was making a general statement about industries. A statement clearly meant to diminish my career while elevating yours, I pointed out. Context matters, Blake. He had the grace to look embarrassed. Fair enough. I also want to be clear that I didn't tell Walter you were aggressive because you're a woman. I said your approach was aggressive because, well, it is. When men are direct, they're lauded for their leadership. When women are direct, they're labeled aggressive. I leaned forward. But that's a broader societal discussion for another time. Right now, we have a project to deliver. Blake nodded slowly. I know I'm out of my depth with the technical aspects, but I do understand Meridian, its culture, its clients, its resistance points. That knowledge is valuable. I studied him, surprised by this moment of self-awareness. Yes, it is, which is why we'll be working together, using both our strengths. So, you're not going to expose my limitations to Walter? Not as long as you don't interfere with my ability to do my job effectively. I stood, signaling the conversation was ending. But understand this, Blake. I don't need to prove I'm better than you. I just need to deliver an exceptional transformation for Meridian. If you help with that, we'll both succeed. He rose, extending his hand. Then we have an understanding. I shook it firmly. We do. I'll see you at the kickoff meeting next week. Come prepared. After he left, I sat back at my desk, contemplating the strange turn of events. From awkward family barbecue to professional power struggle in less than 72 hours. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Did my intel help? Is Blake destroyed yet? I smiled as I typed my response. Not destroyed. Educational process ongoing. But I think he's finally enrolled in the right course. As I drove home that evening, I realized this project would be more complex than I'd initially thought. Not just technically, but interpersonally. Blake Mitchell might have started as an entitled obstacle, but now he was a stakeholder I needed to manage carefully. The real challenge was just beginning, and despite everything, I was looking forward to it. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was genuinely surprised. Not only was Blake following our plan, but he was explicitly crediting my expertise in front of Meridian's leadership. The presentation proceeded smoothly after that. Blake articulated the business vision with clarity, then seamlessly transitioned to me for the technical components. When complex questions arose, he didn't attempt to bluff. Instead, he directed them to me with professional courtesy. By the end of the 2-hour seed session, we'd secured unanimous board approval for the implementation plan. Impressive work, Hoffman said as the meeting concluded. Both of you. Blake, you've clearly developed a strong grasp of the transformation imperatives. Thank you, sir, though I should clarify that the technical architecture is entirely Ms. Chen's design, Blake replied. My contribution has been ensuring it aligns with Meridian's strategic priorities. Hoffman raised an eyebrow, seemingly surprised by Blake's transparency. Honesty about one's contributions is refreshing, Mitchell. Ms. Chen, would you join me for lunch? I'd like to discuss some aspects of the implementation in more detail. The invitation caught me off guard. Of course, Mr. Hoffman. As the boardroom emptied, Blake lingered behind. That went well, I acknowledged, gathering my materials. It did. He hesitated. About before, you were right. I was out of line suggesting I present the technical components. Yes, you were, I agreed. But you made the right call in the actual meeting. That's what matters. Hoffman doesn't issue lunch invitations lightly, he added, a complex expression crossing his face. He's evaluating you for something. Any insights on what that might be? Blake seemed to wrestle with himself before answering. There are rumors about a new C-level position, Chief Transformation Officer, to oversee not just this project, but Meridian's entire digital evolution. I studied him, trying to determine if this was genuine information or strategic misdirection. And you're telling me this because... professional courtesy. He straightened his tie, a nervous gesture I'd come to recognize. Also, pragmatism. If you're going to be involved with Meridian long-term, Better we establish a functional relationship. Now, before I could respond, Hoffman's assistant appeared to escort me to lunch. The restaurant was exactly what I expected from a CEO of Hoffman's generation, an old-school steakhouse where the maitre d' greeted him by name and led us to a secluded corner booth. "I hope you don't mind," Hoffman said after we ordered. "I find these settings more conducive to honest conversation than corporate conference rooms." "I appreciate directness in any setting," I replied. "Good, then I'll be direct." Hoffman leaned forward slightly. "Meridian is at a crossroads. Our traditional clients are aging, and their children, potential inheritors of significant wealth, view us as dinosaurs. Meanwhile, fintech startups are eroding our market share with technology we've been too slow to adopt." I nodded. "Hence the transformation initiative." "Yes, but it's not just about updating our systems. It's about changing our culture, our mindset. That requires leadership with vision." He studied me carefully. "Walter speaks highly of your capabilities. Says you understand both technology and the human components of change." "That's kind of him, but I'm just doing my job." "No false modesty, Ms. Chen. It doesn't suit you." Hoffman took a sip of water. "I'm creating a new position, Chief Transformation Officer, reporting directly to me. The role would oversee not just IT, but our entire digital evolution. I'd like you to consider it." Though Blake had prepared me for this possibility, the directness of the offer still caught me by surprise. "I'm flattered, Mr. Hoffman, but I'm committed to Apex." "Everyone has a price," he replied with the confidence of someone used to getting what he wants. "Name yours." "It's not about compensation," I said truthfully. "I believe in what we're building at Apex." "Then perhaps a hybrid arrangement. Apex handles the implementation while you oversee it as our CTO, with appropriate financial incentives for both parties." He named a compensation package that made my eyes widen slightly. "Think of it as expanding your impact beyond what Apex alone can offer you." "And what about Blake Mitchell?" I asked carefully. I understood he was positioned for executive advancement. Hoffman's expression hardened slightly. "Blake has potential, but also limitations, some of which he seems finally aware of, judging by today's meeting. His family connections got him this far, but Meridian's future requires merit over nepotism." Our meals arrived, giving me a moment to process this information. The offer was tempting, not just financially, but professionally. A C-suite position at a major financial institution would be a career-defining move. But something felt off about the situation. The speed of the offer, the dismissal of Blake despite his improved performance, the way Hoffman assumed I could be lured away from Apex so easily. "This is a significant opportunity," I said carefully. "I'd need time to consider it properly." "Of course, take the weekend. We can discuss details on Monday." Hoffman's tone suggested he expected acceptance as a foregone conclusion. As I returned to Apex that afternoon, my mind was spinning with possibilities and concerns. I barely noticed Blake waiting by my office until he spoke. "So? What did Hoffman want?" I considered deflecting but decided on partial honesty. "To discuss my potential future involvement with Meridian." Blake's expression tightened. "The CTO position. You seem well informed." "My father sits on the board," he reminded me. "Information flows." I studied him, noting the complex emotions behind his professional facade. "Does it bother you?" "That they'd offer a leadership role to an outsider rather than promoting from within?" "You mean rather than promoting me?" He gave a humorless laugh. "A week ago, it would have infuriated me. Now, I'm not sure." "Why not?" Blake hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Working with you has been educational. I've built my career on connections and confidence, not necessarily competence in all areas. That approach has limitations I'm only now recognizing." It was perhaps the most self-aware statement I'd ever heard from him. "What will you do?" he asked. "About Hoffman's offer?" I haven't decided, I answered honestly. It's a compelling opportunity, but there are complications. Blake nodded slowly. Well, whatever you decide, the project needs to succeed. I'm committed to that, regardless of... He trailed off, gesturing vaguely between us. Regardless of our history? Regardless of who ends up leading the transformation long term, he clarified. My career at Meridian may have reached its ceiling, but I still want to deliver something meaningful before I potentially transition elsewhere. As Blake walked away, I realized how significantly our dynamic had evolved in just a few weeks. From condescension at a family barbecue to reluctant professional respect, it wasn't friendship, but it was progress. Now I had a decision to make, one that would affect not just my career, but potentially the trajectory of both Apex and Meridian. The path forward wasn't as clear as I'd expected when this all began. The next 2 weeks were a careful dance of professional boundaries and cautious collaboration. Blake and I established a working rhythm that, while not exactly friendly, was productively civil. He handled the Meridian stakeholders, the relationships, the politics, the cultural nuances, while I managed the technical aspects and transformation strategy. It was working better than I'd expected until the day we needed to present our implementation plan to Meridian's full executive board. The deck looks good, Blake said, reviewing our presentation in the Meridian conference room 30 minutes before the meeting. But I think we should restructure who presents what. I glanced up from my laptop. Meaning, I should lead the technical portions, he said, his tone carefully measured. It will instill more confidence coming from me. I set my laptop aside, studying him. We'd made progress, but clearly not enough. Blake, we agreed you'd handle cultural integration while I cover the technical roadmap. That plays to our respective strengths. These are Meridian executives, he insisted. Old-school finance guys who expect to hear complex information from a man? I finished for him. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. From someone who speaks their language. You're brilliant with the tech, but too... He searched for a diplomatic word, detailed for this audience. Too detailed, I repeated flatly. Or too female and Asian for a room full of white men in their 60s? That's not what I... It's exactly what you meant, even if you're not brave enough to say it. I closed my laptop. Let me be clear. I've presented to boards of directors at companies larger and more traditional than Meridian. I know how to calibrate my message for any audience. What I won't do is let you present technical content you barely understand because you think your gender and Harvard pedigree make you more credible. The conference room door opened before Blake could respond. Walter Raines entered, followed by an older man with silver hair and a commanding presence. Blake, Ms. Chen? Walter nodded. This is Gerald Hoffman, our CEO. I rose to shake his hand, noting that he examined me with particular interest. So, you're the Apex director I've heard so much about, Hoffman said. Walter tells me you've made quite an impression. I hope a positive one, I replied with a professional smile. Indeed, though I understand there was some friction initially. His gaze shifted between Blake and me with clear awareness of our dynamic. Just the usual alignment process when bringing together different organizational cultures, I said, smoothly. We've established an effective working relationship. Excellent. Hoffman turned to Blake. Mitchell, a word before the others arrive? As they stepped aside for a private conversation, Walter moved closer to me. Hoffman rarely attends these technical reviews, he said quietly. He's here specifically to see you in action. Should I be concerned? Walter's expression remained neutral. Let's just say he's interested in how you handle certain institutional resistance. I understood immediately. This wasn't just about the transformation project. It was a test of how I navigated the political landscape at Meridian, including Blake. When the boardroom filled 15 minutes later, I noted the demographics matched exactly what Blake had described. Predominantly men over 60, with the exception of one woman in her 50s, who I later learned was the CHRO. Blake sat near the head of the table beside Hoffman, clearly positioned as an insider, while I remained the external consultant. "Let's begin," Hoffman announced. "Mitchell, you're leading this initiative. The floor is yours." Blake stood, straightening his tie. This was the moment. Would he stick to our agreed presentation plan or attempt to overstep? "Thank you, sir. Before we dive into specifics, I want to acknowledge that this transformation wouldn't be possible without Apex's expertise, particularly Ms. Chen's." He nodded toward me with surprising deference. "While I'll outline the business case and organizational impact, I'll defer to her on the technical architecture and implementation approach, which is where Apex's true value lies." I spent the weekend weighing Hoffman's offer, making pro-con lists that grew increasingly complex. By Sunday night, I still hadn't reached a decision, so I did what I always do when facing a career crossroads. I called my mentor, Vivian, former CIO at a Fortune 50 company and the woman who'd guided my career since graduate school, a C-suite position at a century-old financial institution, Vivian mused after I explained the situation. "Impressive, but not surprising. What's holding you back?" "Several things," I admitted, pacing my apartment. "The timing feels rushed. I've only been involved with Meridian for a few weeks. Fast decisions often indicate either desperation or strategic urgency," Vivian noted. "Which do you think it is?" "Both, maybe? Meridian is definitely behind the curve technologically, but Hoffman doesn't strike me as desperate, more calculating." "What else concerns you?" I hesitated, formulating my thoughts. "The politics. There's this younger executive, Blake Mitchell. The one who dismissed you at the barbecue," Vivian interrupted. "Your nemesis turned reluctant colleague." "He's not my nemesis," I protested. "More like a complicated professional relationship." I could practically hear her raised eyebrow. "Continue." "Blake has family connections throughout Meridian's leadership, but Hoffman seems ready to sideline him in favor of bringing me in. It creates a potentially volatile situation. Office politics exist everywhere, Olivia. You've navigated them successfully at Apex. This feels different, more personal somehow." I stopped pacing, staring out at the city lights. "And then there's Apex itself. We're building something meaningful. Leaving now, especially for a client, feels problematic." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "What does your gut tell you?" "That there's something I'm not seeing," I admitted. "Some angle I'm missing." "Then don't decide yet. Get more information. Meet with Diane at Apex. Understand her perspective on a potential arrangement with Meridian. Talk to Walter Rains. He seems to be a straight shooter, and maybe even discuss it with Blake Mitchell." "Blake? Why would I?" "Because he has insider knowledge about Meridian that you lack, and because his reaction might be illuminating." Vivian's tone was matter-of-fact. "Sometimes our hesitation comes from intuiting problems we haven't yet consciously identified. Don't ignore that." After we hung up, I emailed Diane requesting a morning meeting, then texted Blake. "Need to discuss Meridian situation further. Breakfast tomorrow, 7:30 at Westside Cafe?" His response came surprisingly quickly. "I'll be there." The next morning, I arrived at the cafe early, securing a quiet corner table. Blake showed up precisely at 7:30, wearing a casual button-down rather than his usual suit, a reminder that this was an unofficial meeting. "Thanks for coming," I said as he sat across from me. "Of course." He studied me with curiosity. "Have you made your decision about Hoffman's offer?" "Not yet. That's partly why I wanted to talk." I paused as the server took our orders, then continued. "I need your honest assessment of something. Why is Hoffman moving so quickly with this offer?" Blake considered the question carefully. "Meridian is losing ground to competitors faster than They publicly acknowledge. Our last quarterly earnings were disappointing, not disastrous, but concerning. That doesn't fully explain the urgency of hiring externally at the C-level. Transformation takes years, not quarters. There's board pressure, Blake elaborated, a faction led by Harrison Weber, newer money, tech-adjacent wealth, pushing for dramatic change. Hoffman needs to show decisive action. And you know this how? Blake gave a half smile. Family dinner conversations. My father represents the old guard but recognizes the institution needs to evolve to survive. I nodded, processing this information. What about your role in all this? You seemed surprised but not shocked by the CTO position. I knew it was being discussed, he acknowledged, but I also knew I wasn't being seriously considered. Because of your technical limitations? Partly. He looked down at his coffee. Also because I've been positioned as part of the problem, old. Thinking, family connections over merit, resistance to change. Is that assessment accurate? Blake's expression turned reflective. 6 months ago, I would have denied it completely. Now, I recognize there's some truth there. My value has always been in relationships and institutional knowledge, not innovation. His candor surprised me. That's remarkably self-aware. Working with you has been clarifying, he admitted. Watching someone who actually knows what they're talking about versus someone coasting on confidence and connections, it creates perspective. Our food arrived, giving me a moment to consider his words. The Blake Mitchell sitting across from me now was markedly different from the dismissive man I'd met at the barbecue. There's something else you should know, he said after several bites of his omelet. About Hoffman's offer. I raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. It's not just about transformation. There's an acquisition angle. Meaning? Meridian doesn't just want you, they want Apex's technology and methodology. Hoffman has been floating the idea of acquiring Apex once the initial implementation proves successful. I set down my fork. That wasn't mentioned in our discussions. It wouldn't be, at this stage. But I've heard my father discussing it with other board members. The CTO offer to you is partly meant to facilitate that process. Get key leadership committed before pursuing the larger acquisition. This new information shifted my entire understanding of the situation. It wasn't just about my career move. It potentially affected all of Apex, including Diane and the team we'd built. Thank you for telling me this, I said sincerely. It changes my perspective significantly. Blake nodded. I thought it might. For what it's worth, I think you'd be excellent in the role. But you should have all the facts before deciding. Why? Tell me? It's not in your interest to help me make an informed decision that could further sideline you at Meridian. He seemed to wrestle with the question. Professional integrity partly. But also, he hesitated. I respect what you've built at Apex. Seeing it absorbed by Meridian without full disclosure didn't sit right. That's unexpectedly principled of you. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Don't sound so surprised, even entitled. Finance bros can evolve. We finished breakfast with lighter conversation about the project's technical challenges. As we prepared to leave, Blake hesitated. Whatever you decide about Hoffman's offer, I want you to know I'm committed to making the project successful. No more ego, no more territorial behavior. I appreciate that, I said, meaning it. By the time I reached Apex for my meeting with Diane, I had a much clearer picture of the situation. I found her already in her office, reviewing quarterly projections. Olivia, good timing. I wanted to discuss the Meridian implementation schedule. Meridian is considering acquiring Apex, I interrupted, closing her office door. Diane's expression shifted from surprise to careful neutrality. That's interesting. Where did you hear this? From a reliable source within Meridian. I took the seat across from her desk. Is it something you're aware of? She hesitated, then sighed. Hoffman made preliminary overtures several weeks ago. Nothing formal, just exploring mutual interests. Before or after we secured the transformation contract. During the negotiation phase, she admitted. But Olivia, it was highly speculative. I didn't mention it because it wasn't relevant to your role leading the implementation. It became relevant when Hoffman offered me the CTO position, I countered. A position that would effectively make me the bridge between Apex and Meridian during an acquisition. Diane studied me carefully. You think he's recruiting you as part of an acquisition strategy. It fits the facts, the rushed timeline, the emphasis on my continuing involvement with both organizations. The offer is still a significant opportunity. For you professionally, Diane pointed out. C-suite at your age? At an institution like Meridian? And what about Apex? What happens to the company we've built? To the team? Diane's expression softened. I appreciate your loyalty, Olivia. Truly. But part of leadership is recognizing strategic opportunities, even when they involve change. So you're considering it, I clarified. Selling Apex to Meridian? I'm considering all options that create value for our shareholders and opportunities for our people. Her tone was measured but firm. Including potential strategic partnerships or acquisitions. I nodded slowly, processing this revelation. I need to think about what this means for my decision. Of course. But Olivia, she added as I stood to leave, don't let loyalty to Apex limit your own career trajectory. You've earned this opportunity. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and project work, but my mind kept returning to the complex decision before me. By late afternoon, when my calendar notification reminded me of my scheduled call with Hoffman, I still felt conflicted. As I dialed his number, I reminded myself that information was power. I needed to understand his true intentions before making any decisions. Ms. Chen, Hoffman answered promptly. I've been looking forward to our conversation. Have you had time to consider my offer? I have, Mr. Hoffman, and I have some questions about the broader context. Of course. What would you like to know? I chose my words carefully. I understand there may be discussions about a potential strategic relationship between Meridian and Apex beyond the current implementation project. A brief silence followed, then a low chuckle. You've been doing your homework. Yes, we're exploring various partnership structures with Apex's leadership. Does that affect your interest in the CTO role? It provides important context, I replied neutrally. I'm curious. Why approach me directly rather than working through Diane? Because transformation requires both technological and cultural change, Hoffman answered smoothly. You understand both aspects, and you've already demonstrated your ability to navigate Meridian's unique organizational dynamics. You mean my ability to work effectively with Blake Mitchell despite our initial friction? Precisely. That showed me something about your leadership capabilities. Hoffman paused. Blake has potential, but he represents old Meridian. We need fresh perspective unencumbered by family politics and institutional inertia. And if I were to accept your offer, what would happen to Blake? He'd remain involved with the transformation project, reporting to you. Beyond that would depend on his performance and adaptation to the new direction. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes as Hoffman outlined his vision for Meridian's future and my potential role in it. He was compelling and seemed genuine in his belief that I could help lead Meridian's evolution. Yet something still felt off. Not in what he was saying, but in what remained unsaid about Apex's future and the people who would be affected by an acquisition. When we ended the call, I had all the information I needed to make my decision. I just wasn't entirely sure what that decision would be, By Tuesday morning, I had made my decision. I scheduled meetings with both Hoffman and Diane, then focused on preparing for the Meridian Project kickoff session that afternoon. The team had worked all weekend to finalize the implementation plan, and despite the swirling uncertainties about my future role, I was determined to ensure we started strong. Blake arrived early to the Apex conference room we'd reserved for the kickoff, surprising me as I arranged materials at the head of the table. "You're here before the rest of the team," I observed. "Wanted to review the agenda once more." He looked unusually serious. "Also, I spoke with Hoffman this morning." My hands paused in their sorting. "About?" "He wanted my input on the reporting structure if you accept the CTO role." Blake's expression was carefully neutral. "Asked how I felt about working under your direct supervision." "And what did you tell him?" "The truth. That while it wasn't what I'd initially envisioned for my career trajectory, I recognize that you have expertise I don't possess." He adjusted his tie, that familiar nervous gesture. "I also mentioned that our working relationship has been productive despite our rocky start." I studied him, searching for signs of the resentment or entitlement I'd first encountered at the barbecue. Instead, I found what appeared to be genuine professional respect. "That was generous of you." He shrugged. "Just honest assessment." "Have you decided about his offer?" "Yes," I said simply, not elaborating. Blake nodded, accepting that I wasn't ready to share my decision. "Well, whatever you choose, the work still needs to get done." He gestured to the project materials. "Need help setting up?" We worked in companionable silence until the teams from both companies began filtering in. The kickoff session was scheduled for 3 hours, comprehensive but focused, covering everything from technical architecture to change management approaches. I watched Blake as he greeted the Meridian team members, noting how they deferred to him despite his youth relative to many of the senior staff. Family connections had opened doors for him, certainly, but he'd clearly earned a measure of respect through his own efforts. The session progressed smoothly, with Blake and I tag-teaming the presentation sections as we'd planned. When technical questions arose, he deferred to me without hesitation. When cultural or procedural issues came up, I redirected to him. It was the kind of seamless professional partnership that typically takes months to develop, not weeks. During a short break, Walter Rains approached me at the refreshment table. "Impressive work so far," he commented, refilling his coffee. "You and Mitchell have developed an effective dynamic." "Thank you. We've found a rhythm that works." Walter glanced toward Blake, who was engaged in conversation with several Meridian team members. "Hoffman mentioned he's made you an offer, CTO position." News travels fast. In financial institutions, information is currency. Walter's expression remained neutral. "Have you accepted?" "I'm meeting with him tomorrow to discuss." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I've been at Meridian for 34 years. Seen CEOs come and go, watched strategies shift with the market. Throughout all of it, one thing has remained constant." "What's that?" "The politics are always more complicated than they first appear." He gave me a meaningful look, especially when family interests are involved. Before I could probe further, the break ended, and we returned to the presentation. But Walter's cryptic warning lingered in my mind as we concluded the session, and the teams dispersed with clear next steps and assignments. Blake lingered behind again, helping me gather materials. "That went well," he remarked. "The technical team seemed particularly engaged with your cloud migration approach." "Your change management framework was equally well received," I acknowledged. "You've clearly given this a lot of thought." "Had to. Meridian's culture is resistant to change by design. It's how we've maintained stability through market fluctuations." He paused in his gathering of papers. "It's actually why I've been pushing for this transformation for the past year, despite the institutional resistance." "You've been advocating for it that long?" This was new information. I thought this was a recent initiative. The formal project is recent, But the push has been ongoing. A hint of frustration crept into his voice. I've been trying to convince the board that we need to evolve or risk obsolescence. Hoffman finally listened when our main competitor launched their digital platform and took 3 of our largest clients. I processed this revelation. So the transformation was originally your initiative? My vision, at least in broad strokes. I lack the technical expertise to execute it properly, which is why bringing in Apex was crucial. He shrugged, attempting casualness. Hoffman positioning himself as the champion of digital evolution is just politics, part of the game. The picture was becoming clearer. Blake had identified the need for transformation and advocated for it, likely facing significant resistance due to his age and family connections. Hoffman had initially dismissed his concerns, then co-opted his vision when market pressures made it unavoidable. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because your decision about the CTO role should be fully informed. Blake met my gaze directly. Hoffman will take credit for the transformation vision because it serves his narrative with the board. But the institutional knowledge of what's been tried before, what's failed, and why, that context matters for success. And you have that context? I do. He hesitated, which is why, despite what Hoffman may have implied, sidelining me completely would be a strategic error for the project. I considered his words carefully. Are you lobbying for a specific role in the new structure? I'm providing relevant information for your decision-making. A hint of the old Blake emerged in his confident tone. What you do with it is your prerogative, of course. As we parted ways, I reflected on how significantly my understanding of both Blake and the Meridian situation had evolved. What had initially seemed like a straightforward case of an entitled executive getting his comeuppance had transformed into something far more nuanced. Office politics, strategic vision, family dynamics, and corporate evolution all intertwined. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Family dinner drama alert. Blake apparently told Uncle Richard you're being offered some big fancy job at Meridian. Aunt Patricia is losing it. Direct quote. He's being passed over for some woman he met at a barbecue. This is better than Netflix. I smiled despite myself. Any other interesting reactions? Blake actually defended you, said you were exceptionally qualified, and had transformed his thinking about effective leadership. Who is this pod person that replaced my jerk cousin? That afternoon, I met with Diane in her office, closing the door for privacy. I've decided to decline Hoffman's CTO offer, I said without preamble. Diane's expression registered surprise, then careful neutrality. May I ask why? It's an exceptional opportunity. Several reasons. First, I believe I can create more value at Apex than I could as part of Meridian's traditional structure. And the other reasons? The CTO offer appears to be part of a broader acquisition strategy. I'm not comfortable being positioned as a bridge to facilitate Apex's absorption into Meridian. Diane leaned back in her chair. You've been doing your research. It's my job to understand the strategic landscape, I replied evenly. Which brings me to my proposal. I'm listening. Instead of selling Apex to Meridian, we should consider acquiring key divisions of Meridian instead. Specifically, their wealth management technology and client base. Diane's eyebrows rose. That's ambitious. Meridian's technological infrastructure is outdated, but their client relationships are valuable and stable. Meanwhile, Apex has cutting-edge technology but lacks penetration in the financial services sector. I handed her a preliminary analysis I'd prepared. This shows the potential synergies of a targeted acquisition rather than a complete merger. She scanned the document, her expression shifting from skepticism to intrigue. This would require significant capital. We'd need investors, yes, but Meridian's shareholders are increasingly concerned about their competitive position. A structured deal could offer them better value than continuing to lose market share. And what role do you see for yourself in this scenario? I'd lead the integration team and oversee the new financial services division we'd create with Meridian's assets. I leaned forward. We'd be creating something new, Diane. Not just updating old systems, but building a truly innovative approach to financial technology. Diane studied me with newfound appreciation. You've thought this through carefully. It's what you hired me to do. Identify strategic opportunities and develop executable plans. What about Meridian's leadership? Hoffman won't take kindly to having his acquisition target attempt to reverse the scenario. That's where the company politics get interesting. I smiled slightly. Walter Raines heads the faction on Meridian's board that's most concerned about their technological lag. With the right approach, we could win his support. And Blake Mitchell? Where does he fit into your vision? It was a good question, one I'd been considering carefully. He has valuable institutional knowledge and client relationships. In the right role, with proper technical support, he could be an asset to the I. Integration. Diane set down the proposal, her expression thoughtful. This is why I hired you, Olivia. You see opportunities others miss. She smiled. Draft a more detailed version of this for our executive committee. If they approve, we'll approach select Meridian board members discreetly. As I left Diane's office, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path forward was complex and uncertain, but it was also full of possibility, not just for me personally, but for both organizations. My phone buzzed with another text, this time from Blake. Just heard you're meeting with Hoffman tomorrow. Whatever you decide, I want you to know I meant what I said about commitment to project success. No ego, no politics. I paused in the hallway, considering my response. After a moment, I typed, I appreciate that, and I think you might find my decision interesting. Coffee tomorrow after my Hoffman meeting? There's something I'd like to discuss. With you. His reply came quickly. I'll be there. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the strange journey that had begun with a reluctant appearance at a family barbecue. What had started as an awkward social obligation had somehow evolved into a career-defining opportunity, just not in the way anyone, least of all me, had expected. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and ambitious proposals. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction at how far we'd all come, since Blake dismissed me as a failure in tech only a few weeks ago. The game had changed completely, and I was now writing the rules. My meeting with Gerald Hoffman was scheduled for 9 a.m. in his corner office at Meridian headquarters. I arrived 15 minutes early, using the time to observe the operations floor from the waiting area. The contrast between the modern glass and steel, building exterior and the distinctly traditional interior spoke volumes about Meridian's identity crisis, wanting to appear contemporary while clinging to outdated systems and approaches. Ms. Chen, Hoffman's assistant called. He's ready for you. Hoffman greeted me with confident warmth, gesturing to a seating area rather than the more formal arrangement at his desk. A power move designed to create the illusion of casual collaboration while maintaining his home field advantage. I've been looking forward to this conversation, he said, settling into a leather armchair. I trust you've had adequate time to consider our offer? I have, Mr. Hoffman, and I appreciate the opportunity. I maintained direct eye contact. After careful consideration, I've decided to decline the CTO position. His expression flickered with surprise before settling into something more calculated. I see. May I ask what influenced your decision? Perhaps there are aspects of the offer we could adjust. It's not about compensation or title, I assured him. It's about alignment with my professional goals and values. Which are? Building. Something truly transformative, not just improving existing systems. And doing so in an environment where innovation is part of the culture, not an afterthought. Hoffman leaned forward slightly. That's precisely what the CTO role would allow you to do. reshape Meridian's culture from within. With respect, Mr. Hoffman, culture is established from the top. Your approach to this transformation project has been revealing in that regard. Meaning? You positioned yourself as the champion of digital evolution, despite initially resisting the very initiatives Blake Mitchell proposed over a year ago. You offered me a leadership role without full transparency about your acquisition intentions toward Apex. These decisions suggest tactical thinking rather than transformative vision. Hoffman's genial facade hardened. You've been speaking with Mitchell, among others. My job requires understanding the complete organizational context, not just the official narrative. He studied me with newfound intensity. You're making a significant career miscalculation, Ms. Chen. The opportunity I've offered doesn't come along often, especially for someone at your career stage. On the contrary, I believe I'm making a strategically sound decision based on complete information. I maintained a professional tone. And I'd like to propose an alternative approach that might better serve both Meridian and Apex. I'm listening, though I doubt there's a superior alternative to what I've offered. Instead of Meridian acquiring Apex, consider allowing Apex to acquire specific divisions of Meridian, namely your wealth management technology and client relationships. Hoffman's surprise gave way to a short, dismissive laugh. That's absurd. Meridian is 5 times Apex's size. In overall valuation, yes. But in technological capabilities and innovation potential, Apex significantly outperforms Meridian by every metric. I leaned forward slightly. Your board is increasingly concerned about market share erosion to fintech competitors. A strategic partnership where Apex leads the technological evolution while preserving Meridian's client relationships could create substantial shareholder value. This sounds like Diane Miller's strategy, not yours, he countered. It's a collaborative vision with support from Apex's leadership, but the analysis and proposal originated with me. I handed him a condensed version of the document I'd prepared for Diane. The financial projections demonstrate the potential upside compared to a traditional acquisition approach. Hoffman barely glanced at the paper. Ms. Chen, while I appreciate your creativity, this isn't a realistic proposition. Meridian doesn't need to be rescued by a tech company barely a decade old. It's not about rescue, Mr. Hoffman. It's about strategic evolution. The financial services landscape is changing. Fundamentally, the question isn't whether Meridian will need to transform, it's whether you'll do so proactively or reactively. And you believe you're the one to lead this transformation, despite rejecting the opportunity I've provided? I believe the right transformation requires the right structure. What I'm proposing creates more value for both organizations than your acquisition approach. Hoffman set the proposal aside with finality. I'll be direct, Ms. Chen. This alternative isn't viable. The CTO offer remains open until end of day. I suggest you reconsider your position. I stood, gathering my materials. Thank you for your time, Mr. Hoffman. Regardless of your interest in our counterproposal, Apex remains committed to successfully delivering Meridian's current transformation project. As I turned to leave, Hoffman added, "You should know that if you decline this opportunity, I'll be recommending that Meridian explore other implementation partners for our digital transformation. Apex's continued involvement isn't guaranteed. It was a last-ditch attempt to leverage his position, one I'd anticipated. That's certainly your prerogative, though I imagine Walter Rains and the technical team might have concerns about starting over after the progress we've demonstrated." His expression confirmed I'd hit a nerve. Walter clearly had more influence than Hoffman wanted to acknowledge. I left Meridian's headquarters and headed directly to the cafe where I'd arranged to meet Blake. He was already there, 2 coffees on the table, one black, one with oat milk. Exactly how I took it. That's presumptuous, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. Educated guess. You mentioned it during the requirements gathering session. He pushed the cup toward me. How did it go with Hoffman? About as expected. I declined the offer. Blake's eyebrows rose slightly. That's not what I anticipated. May I ask why? Several reasons. The most relevant being that I believe I can create more value at Apex than as part of Meridian's current structure. Current structure, he repeated thoughtfully. That's a specific qualification. Observant of you to notice. I took a sip of my coffee. I actually proposed an alternative to Hoffman, one that would restructure the relationship between Apex and Meridian entirely. Blake leaned forward with genuine interest. What kind of alternative? Rather than Meridian acquiring Apex, I suggested Apex acquire key divisions of Meridian, specifically your wealth management technology and client relationships. He sat back, processing this. That's bold. How did Hoffman respond? Dismissively, as expected. But his isn't the only voice that matters at Meridian. I studied Blake carefully, which brings me to why I wanted to meet with you. I'm listening. You understand Meridian's internal politics better than anyone. You've advocated for meaningful technological transformation despite institutional resistance. And you have credibility, with both Walter Raines and the board faction that recognizes the need for change. All true, he acknowledged. So I'm proposing a partnership. You help us navigate Meridian's internal landscape to position our counteroffer effectively, and I ensure you have a leadership role in whatever new structure emerges. Blake's expression turned skeptical. What kind of leadership role? That depends on what you actually want, Blake. Not what your family expects, not what Meridian's hierarchy dictates, what you genuinely want for your career. He was quiet for a long moment, considering. You know, no one has actually asked me that question before. He traced the rim of his coffee cup thoughtfully. I enjoy the client relationship aspects of financial services. I'm good at understanding people's needs and translating them into solutions. What I don't enjoy is pretending to understand technical details I haven't mastered, or being promoted based on connections rather than competence. I nodded. So, in an ideal scenario? In an ideal world, I'd lead client strategy and relationship management for a forward-thinking financial services organization, working alongside technical experts I respect without pretending to be one myself. He gave a self-deprecating smile. Ambitious but honest. That's actually a perfect fit for what we're envisioning. I leaned forward. Apex needs someone who understands the financial services landscape and client expectations. Someone who can bridge the gap between technological capabilities and market needs. And you think that person is me? His tone was genuinely curious, not defensive. I think it could be, if you're willing to embrace a different definition of success than the one your family prescribed. Blake considered this, a new intensity in his expression. What exactly would you need from me? Help us get a meeting with Walter Raines and the board members most concerned about Meridian's competitive position. Use your insider knowledge to help us craft a proposal that addresses their specific concerns, and be willing to publicly support a partnership structure that positions Apex as the technological leader. Essentially, help you outmaneuver Hoffman. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. My family would have strong opinions about that. Undoubtedly. The question is whether you're ready to make decisions based on your professional judgment rather than family politics. He studied me across the table. You know, at that barbecue, when I dismissed tech as a refuge for people who couldn't handle real industries, I wasn't just being arrogant. I was parroting my father's perspective, a perspective I've been increasingly questioning. And now I recognize that true innovation is happening in technology, not traditional finance. The future belongs to those who can bridge both worlds effectively. He extended his hand across the table. I'm in. Let's reshape this relationship in a way that makes sense for both organizations. I shook his hand, surprised by the genuine sense of partnership I felt. First step, we need to get Walter alone, away from Hoffman's influence. Leave that to me. Blake said with newfound confidence. He has a standing tea time on Thursdays. I'll arrange to join him. Perfect. By then, I'll have a more detailed proposal for him to review. As we left the cafe, Blake paused. Just to be clear, if this works, you would be effectively leading the new financial services division at Apex, which means that I would be your boss, I confirmed. Is that going to be a problem? He considered this, then shook his head with a wry smile. Honestly, it's probably the most legitimate reporting structure I'd have experienced at either company. Merit over connections. Isn't that how it should work? In theory, yes. Though we both know reality is usually more complicated. Speaking of complicated, Blake added, Sarah's hosting a dinner party next weekend. She specifically asked me to invite you. I raised an eyebrow. A Mitchell family gathering? After everything that's happened? Just Sarah, her boyfriend, me, and a few friends. No Aunt Patricia, I promise. His expression turned mischievous. Though I'm sure she'd love to meet the woman who's revolutionizing her son's career trajectory. One family gathering was enough, thank you. Fair enough. Though if we pull this off, we'll be professional family of sorts. He gestured between us. Strange how things evolve, isn't it? Indeed. I smiled despite myself. From failure to boss in less than a month. Not the career path either of us anticipated. For what it's worth, Blake said as we prepared to part ways, I was wrong about you, spectacularly wrong, and I'm actually glad about that. Careful, Blake. That almost sounds like personal growth. He laughed, a genuine sound I hadn't heard from him before. Don't worry, my ego is still intact, just better calibrated. 3 weeks later, I sat in Apex's main conference room as Diane announced the finalized agreement. Apex would acquire Meridian's wealth management technology division and client portfolio in exchange for equity and structured revenue sharing. Walter Raines would join Apex's board of directors, while Blake would lead the newly formed Apex Wealth Division as Senior Vice President of Client Strategy, reporting to me as Executive Vice President of Financial Services. Hoffman had fought the arrangement initially, but Walter and 3 other board members had ultimately overruled him, recognizing the strategic value of the partnership for Meridian's shareholders. It wasn't a complete victory. Compromises had been made on both sides, but it was an innovative solution that positioned both organizations for future success. As the announcement concluded and people dispersed to their next meetings, Blake approached my chair. Congratulations, EVP Chen, he said with a genuine smile. Quite the promotion. Congratulations yourself, SVP Mitchell. Ready for your first assignment? Absolutely, though I still can't believe how this all started. With a barbecue I didn't want to attend and an arrogant comment about failures in tech, I reminded him. Not my finest moment, he acknowledged. Though in my defense, I had no idea I was insulting my future boss. A mistake you're unlikely to repeat, I imagine. Definitely not. He adjusted his tie, that familiar gesture now reading as self-awareness, rather than nervousness. I've learned my lesson about making assumptions based on superficial judgments. Good, because in this new structure, we're judging performance on merit alone. I wouldn't have it any other way. He glanced at his watch. Strategy meeting at 2? I'll see you there. As Blake walked away, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. OMG, did you seriously just become my cousin's boss? This is the best thing that's ever happened in Mitchell family history. Please reconsider my dinner invitation. I promise excellent. Wine and a front row seat to Blake's continued personal evolution. I smiled, typing back. Fine, but only because I'm curious about this evolution you mentioned. And because you promised good wine. When I looked up from my phone, I caught sight of my reflection in the conference room glass. Confident, accomplished, exactly where I was meant to be. Not despite being underestimated, but partly because of it. Sometimes being dismissed as a failure is just the beginning of proving exactly how successful you can be.